Hello, my name is Joel Robinson.
And I'm Bajan, and today we're going to be discussing a few topics that are encompassed in badge number 2. And so those topics are scarcity, how it relates to poverty, absolute advantage, comparative advantage, Maslow's hierarchy, as well as the production possibilities frontier. Poverty exists primarily because of scarcity. Now, scarcity is a concept that indicates that there's less of a good freely available from nature than people would like, that they need. Now, this can create a state of hardship which defines poverty. Poverty is subjective, whereas scarcity is objective. If there's too little of a supply, you can clearly see that, whereas our standard of poverty in America differs very much from the standard of poverty in, say, China or Africa, any African country. Now, in recent decades, through technological progress, we've seen a decrease in international poverty from around 29% in 1990 to around 18% in 2004. This is largely due to targeting scarce resources and making them more plentiful, available, and accessible through introducing technology into places of scarcity.
In order to improve people's lives, we must improve it through economic development. Now it all goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Starting with physiological needs. These include food, water, shelter, and sex. Now, this may seem like something that a person can get without economic development. However, through economic development, things such as trade and more advanced technology, people have more time to focus on these needs and go on to things like safety, which would include security and feeling safe at home. And then on to love, which would be friendship or a keen partner. Moving on to esteem, which would be workplace esteem, for example, where you actually feel like you have some real worth. And then lastly, self-actualization, morality. Some of the core concepts that we take for granted, but people who haven't developed their physiological needs haven't even thought about.
Now, we can further explore this point by exploring a similar concept that we went through in class, the abundance pyramid. Now, the first layer of the abundance pyramid is very similar to the first layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is composed of survival concerns, food, water, shelter, all you need to get by through the day. Now, once you live in a society that makes all of these elements widely available, we can move on to the second layer. The second layer is composed of components that act as catalysts for further growth. So, abundant energy, equal education opportunities, access to communication. Now, once all these are made, we can move to the final layer, top, freedom and health, which really acts as a way for everyone to contribute to society as much as they can. Once everyone is free and in good health, there's nothing to hold anyone back from contributing. So scarcity is another related concept that we went over in class, and scarcity is defined as a state where a good or a resource that is necessary is not as freely available as a society would want it to be, or need it to be. Now, such scarcity can create a state of hardship, which really defines poverty. Now, poverty is more subjective in nature. Our own concept of poverty is vastly different than, say, a village in Kenya would have, or a farmer in China, so on and so forth. These concepts really, though, walk hand in hand. If you have a lot of scarcity, you're most likely to be living in poverty. Now, with that said, there are two different types of poverty. There is absolute poverty, and there's also relative poverty. Now, absolute poverty is defined as a measure of the number of people that live under a certain income threshold. This threshold is currently defined as under $125 a day. To give you some stats, between the years of 2002 and 2007, there was an international comparison made. Only about 2% of the U.S. population was living under this threshold of $1.25 a day. In Nigeria, 61 to 80%. Now, from this, we can see that absolute poverty is a good measure of the standard of living between regions. But once we move to relative poverty, we'll see it's a better way to gauge the living conditions between different social classes in a given economic or geographic entity. Now, just as relative poverty is often contextual, so is scarcity. Now, scarcity can often be eliminated by the introduction of new and improved technologies. Technology is a resource-liberating mechanism. We can grab the high-hanging fruit with this mechanism. It makes all resources more accessible and available. Technological progress has decreased poverty from around 29% in 1990 to 18% in 2004. And there are a few life examples we can point to. For one, in Kerala, India, fishermen were given phones, and this allowed them to contact markets before they actually went out to conduct their catches. Within a few weeks, profits increased 9%, and prices decreased 4%.
One of the best ways to combat scarcity is through trade. Now this point can be illustrated through the production possibility frontier on the two-sector model. In order to further explore comparative advantage, it would be beneficial if we look at it mathematically. Now imagine there are two countries, country A and country B. In an attempt to represent their abilities to farm and manufacture, we use these two variables, theta and gamma. Theta represents the country's ability to produce farm units or agricultural units. Gamma represents the manufacturing units that they can create. Now comparative advantage is exactly what it sounds like. We're comparing country A to country B. Now if we want to look which one is going to be able to produce more, we're very simply going to divide country B's theta by country A's theta. Here we can see that country B can produce 1.2 more units than country A can. Now in terms of manufacturing, country B can produce 2 more units than country A can. Very simply, country B should create manufacturing units because they're so much better at it. That's comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is really pretty similar. However, we're really just going to go back to the theta and gamma and see which has a higher absolute value. For example, country B has a higher theta, so they have the absolute advantage in producing farming units. They also have an absolute advantage in producing manufacturing units, as you can see 4 and 2.
So now we're going to use that analysis of comparative and absolute advantage and apply it to an examination of the production possibilities frontier on the two-sector model. So we're going to use the same figures that we established for country A, it having a farming productivity rate per person of 5 and manufacturing productivity rate of 2. Psi here will represent Engel's law, meaning that for every 1 person in the population, 2 units of food are required for sustenance. And we will assume that our population is 600. So, given these stats, we need to make some calculations in order to produce the production possibilities frontier. So we start off by examining how much food does the society need. Well, we have a population of 600. By Engel's law here, we see every person needs 2 units. 600 times 2, we need 1,200 units of food. How many people do we need to produce this food? Well, 1,200 divided by 5, which is our farming productivity rate, will equal 240 farmers. So with that amount of the population producing food, what's left over, 360 people, can manufacture. Now those 360 manufacturers, each having a productivity rate of 2, can produce 720 manufacturing units. So now that we've established these figures, we can move on to the actual two-sector model. Now on a two-sector model, on the y-axis we have total manufacturing units, and on the x-axis we have how much food we can produce. So let's examine extremes. If everyone in this population produced food, we would have 600 people producing at a rate of 5 units of food. We would have a max of 3,000 units. However, we don't need that many, so we have people manufacturing as well. Now if everyone manufactured, we would have 600 times 2, we would have 1,200 units of manufacturing. But we're not producing at extremes here. We're producing first at the level that meets Engel's law, and the remainder of the population is producing manufacturing units. So at that rate, with food, we're going to map a point, an equilibrium point, on this production possibilities frontier that indicates where we are at in food production, that being 1,200, with manufacturing production, that being 720. As long as we meet Engel's law, the remainder can produce manufacturing. Thus, we reach this point on the production possibilities frontier. Now, with trade, we can see movements along this production possibilities frontier, and that's what we went over with comparative and absolute advantage. But as it is with country 1, this would be the optimal point. So, in conclusion, again, I'm Douglas Bajan.
And I'm Joel Robinson. Thank you very much for watching. We learned a bunch about the two-sector model, absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and we hope to apply this knowledge to some of our projects going forward. And hopefully, with some luck, we can improve some developing nations.